Today's episode is brought to you by my top resource for women's health professionals, How to Interpret Virtually Any Chart Your Client Throws at You. Our new ebook breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 518. In today's episode, we are diving into a topic that we don't cover as much on the podcast, which is optimizing your chances of conception with IVF. Naturally, the strategies that we talk about, and in last week's episode, the strategies we talked about to supporting egg quality, of course, do lend itself to improved IVF outcomes, because when you're improving egg quality, you are naturally doing that. But in today's episode, we jump into a bit of a different take on this topic of optimizing your chances of conception with IVF. Today, I'm sharing my interview with Tasha Blasi. She is an IVF consultant and founder of IVF Uncovered. Using her background in the sciences and personally going through 10 rounds of IVF for her 2 children, she has created a life mission to help patients doing IVF know almost as much as their doctor about perfect protocols and strategies so they can protect their investment, plus increase their chances for success, all while bringing an unfiltered, humorous tone to this often heartbreaking subject. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Tasha. And I'm so excited to be here today with Tasha Blasi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you as well. I love your work and I love what you do, and it's so important.
Well, thank you so much. Well, and this is a topic that I don't cover as frequently as I probably should, but today we're going to dive into IVF and talk about some of your strategies to optimize that. So I would love to start by, if you would share a little bit about your background, what brought you into the work that you do. And I would love to also hear your personal story, because I know that's part of your journey.
Yes, of course. So my story is a little bit different, right? Most people say, oh, the hero's journey of you go through a struggle and then you figure out, what the problem is and you come out successful. And then it's like, you want to share that with the world. That wasn't exactly what happened with me. I would say I had I don't know what you would call it, journey. I did 9 egg retrievals and 10 embryo transfers, and it was a male factor, and I was in my early 30s. So that just didn't make sense. So when people are like, what finally worked? I'm like, don't do anything that I did. Hindsight, I was being qualified, right? Nobody is going to, it's harder to listen to somebody who is like, oh, I got pregnant with my 2 kids after 2 rounds. I think I was being qualified, hindsight, and I needed to go through just such insane journey for the 5 years that I did to have my 2 kids, because I can now fully and totally empathize with my clients. I'm an IVF consultant. And so it was after my journey. My daughter my second was born. And that is where it was somebody else's idea that I should be a fertility coach. And I'm like, that's not a thing. This is back in 2016. And I'm like, that's not a thing. And they're like, make it a thing. And then 6 days later, I get fired from my corporate job, right? I was a biology teacher. Then I went into corporate America and I got fired 6 days later. I was like, okay, God, I hear you. Okay, that was subtle. So that's when it started, my journey. That was in 2016. And then my research really began of what is preventing people from easily getting and staying pregnant, like with me. And I just have been researching ever since. And then in 2022, I actually put together a formula for perfect protocols and strategies for IVF for every individual biology. And that's, I think, the biggest miss here. The protocol that they were doing on me, again, 33-year-old, great egg reserve, no fertility issues. We're doing this because of male factor, which, by the way, that protocol didn't work. That's what I call the cookie cutter approach. Is the same one that I see on my patients with PCOS, my patients with low egg reserve, short cycles, long. And I'm like, this is not the most optimized way to do IVF. So my journey has been a lot of research and finally creating an actual formula to make IVF as successful as possible, as well as, of course, supporting the women that I'm working with along the way, because I surely do know what it feels like to just, be heartbroken for so many years, almost hollow. I was numb by the end of it.
Well, that's incredible. Not in like a good way, but like just to think about what you had to go through over those 5 years. Like that's a lot of that's a lot. So I want to dig into that a little bit. Maybe share. It's a big loaded question, but you mentioned that it was you kind of said a lot of things, right? But one of the things you said was like you were young, your egg reserve was actually okay, right? Like your egg quality is probably fine. And then in your case, it was related to male factor. And I'm outspoken about that, obviously, because it's huge. But share with us from your perspective, like what they did and what they did wrong in your case, like what you feel like if I'll ask this other question after, but I'll leave that one there.
Okay. So, and by the way, my voice, I just got over the flu, but so I hope you love my sexy, raspy voice. Some people may listen to me and be like, who is that? So what they did wrong, okay, hindsight, 2020, right? What they did wrong is now what I teach my clients, which is first there's the science. And this is the protocol. I was not doing the right protocol. I was doing the cookie cutter approach, which I call it. That's like you take birth control, 300 Gonal-F, 150 Menopur, an antagonist, you do an Alpha shot. 9 days later, 9 days later is the trigger shot. So it was the wrong protocol. It was not the right strategies. And hindsight, I should have been on a very different protocol. So that was the first part of it. And I should say, because this leads me to the second part, I got pregnant on the second round of IVF. So 2 egg retrievals, 2 transfers. Again, I never had excess embryos. It was always kind of like, whoa, we only got a couple out of the 15 eggs. Like, let's just put them in. That was my son, round 2. So I wasn't doing the right protocol to allow for optimized IVF. It worked the second round. Baby number 2, however, took me an additional 8 transfers, 7 egg retrievals, and 3 years. And I think that was a combination of, again, the wrong science. I was doing the same protocols over and over. Sometimes they'd increase the dose a bit. Then they'd add on a Lupron flare. Like, this is what I see. I see like 3 protocols just done. And it's like, if that doesn't work, eventually they're like, you need egg donor. And that's exactly what they told me, right? It's not working. You must need egg donor, even though I was still like mid-30s at that point. So I think the second part, other than the wrong science, which is always my first pillar, is my body was in chronic survival mode. And this is where, this is the genius of your work. Our bodies give us very clear signals that we are in survival mode, and we don't listen to them. Or honestly, it's not about not listening. It's not being aware that that's what is happening. I was working in New York City at the time. At this point now I have a small child because I started baby number 2 when Hudson was 1. And I was just running on empty, but I didn't realize it. It's just what you did. You worked all day and then you took care of your baby all day and night, and you just did too much, So I had once in a while migraines, once in a while these excruciating stomach pains. I did have like constipation. I did have major anxiety, right? But I was in New York City in corporate America and had a young kid. So why I say all this is round 2, I would say, yes, wrong science. And my body was like, dude, I let you get pregnant the first time because you were only 33. Like, you are not getting pregnant again. And I think that was a big miss. One, I just didn't know, right? I was totally ignorant. But the big miss is we need to listen to the signs, like you talk about the 5th vital sign. What if your period isn't easy and regular? There's something wrong, right? There's something off. There's a hormonal imbalance that you could fix if you know what to do and why it's happening. And so that was my big miss with baby number 2, is I was just depleted, physically and mentally depleted, but I was just a normal American woman in a big city. And my body would not get pregnant again because it was in survival mode.
Well, and you mentioned the protocols and the cookie cutter approach. So are you referring to just the what they do, like their drug cocktail, the how they prepare the uterus with the synthetic estrogens, and like, are you referring to like their process when you talk about the protocols?
Yes. When I'm talking about the protocol, it's the medications used and also the strategies used. The how long are we on medication and how is the growth? Little tweaks like that, even just in like how many days you're on stim drugs can really affect the quality of the embryos. And then yes, preparing for the transfer, that is very cookie cutter. It's always just like give them a ton of estrogen and then give them progesterone and then you're done. And it's like some women most women, I would say, do terribly on estrogen, right? We need to be so careful with this synthetic estrogen. And by the way, before we put in the embryo, do we know for sure nothing is blocking implantation? So when I say the cookie cutter approach, depending on if I'm talking about an egg retrieval or a transfer, yes, it's about the protocols and strategies and for both. For the transfer specifically, I want to assume things will get in the way of implantation and cross that off that we know for sure they won't versus, and I get why they do this, but versus most of the IVF doctors are going to assume nothing is going to get in the way of implantation, but not know for sure until there's a problem. The problem is multiple failed transfers or multiple pregnancy losses.
Okay. And then another question is, if you're the patient, how would you change the course of events?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's not even easy to ask your doctor to change a prescription, let alone to change the course of your IVF treatment, right?
Yes, yes. And this is where the finesse comes in what I do. So it depends. I will say for the most part, because of how I present the questions. So I'm kind of in the background. I teach my clients, like, first of all, I go over everything with them. This is what I see. This is how it can be modified. This is your protocol perfect strategies. And then it's questions for the doctor. And we always approach the questions with, of course, respect, kindness, and curiosity. Okay. When you are able to, and I've worked with every doctor, the most famous, think about the most famous doctor. I've absolutely worked with him, him. But when you approach it with, hey, I see, let's go with really uneven growth, right? That's a really common thing where you have a couple big follicles, a couple small follicles, and it's like, well, now we have half our egg reserve because they didn't grow synchronously. So how do we do that? Okay, I noticed really uneven growth. What do you think we should do next time to help even up the growth? We always listen to what they have to say, right? And I write it differently versus if I'm writing an email versus I'm creating questions for them to ask in person. But then it's, I have heard that XYZ could help even up the growth. What do you think? So we cannot tell a doctor what to do. If we approach it very factually of you can agree this wasn't ideal. Okay. Yeah. Next, what do you think we should do to help it? Okay. Have you heard about these things? If they don't mention, I always give my clients like 3 different ways we can do most things. So it's more of a conversation. The client is informed enough to know, in this case, what could help even up the growth. And they are armed with, this is what to know. So now have a respectful, curious conversation about it with your doctor. And for the most part, the doctor like, yeah, sure, we can try that. Yeah, that works. Yeah. There's no research. Some doctors want a science paper on everything. Unfortunately, there are amazing strategies without science papers that some doctors know about, some doctors don't. But for the most part, they're like, yeah, that's fine. I find it to be a very big red flag, however, and I've only encountered this, I would say, since 2016, maybe 3 times, where the doctor gets very offended by questions. Okay, that's a huge red flag to me. The doctor, like I can think about this one where the doctor was like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing this for 30 years. And that's all his response was. I've been doing this for 30 years. And what's kind of funny about that is I have a doctor behind me, supporting me, mentoring me. We talk about protocols. We do our research together. And I brought this up to her, and I forgot, I think it was something about like how he was using the estrogen was just so wrong. And I'm like, I always say to her, like, am I crazy? Like, do you know what I mean? Like fact check me. Do I know this or not? Am I missing something? She's like, you're not missing something. She goes, and by the way, he's not even board certified. So he was an OBGYN with a certification, right? Not board certified, ramming down my client's throat like, I've been doing this 30 years. I've been doing this. Yeah, but you probably haven't had any training in the last 30 years, right? To know how things have changed. So that's to me a big red flag. I always tell my clients, your doctor has a problem with questions, that's their problem. But it's hard. I get it. And I have to talk them through it or really, I'm there for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is all so interesting. I mean, it's always a challenge to get medical professionals to, but I like the way that you kind of approach it, because things work better if they think it's their idea.
Yes. So
In
it's
a lot
always,
of
what do you
different,
think? Right.
not even just with doctors, like even if it's with husbands or children,
Yeah.
it's always better if they think that it's their idea. So
Yes.
yeah, that's really interesting. And of
And
course,
I was just going to say, and then just something about, like, I know for a lot of your clients, they can't get blood work done, right? I'm sure you've experienced this. It's like, for
yeah,
me, I need certain blood work done to know, why did you have a pregnancy loss? Well, what was your progesterone? Oh, well, it wasn't measured. Okay. We got to get that measured. How do we get that measured? Well, the doctor may say, your progesterone was fine. Basically, like, we just assume it's fine. Okay. I hate assuming.
yeah.
So another way to approach something like blood work is kind of to say, like, I know, but basically, like, I know, like, I'm being annoying, or I know this is a lot. Not that you have to say, I know I'm being annoying, but do you know what I mean? Like, I understand this isn't the way it's done. However, data just really helps me understand things. Like, make it about you needing data. They don't need the data. But could you just support me? Because I need the data. It helps me feel more secure. Just knowing for sure, I'm sure you're right. I know you're right. The data would just really help me. And that's another way to kind of approach doctors. And, if they ever say to you, well, it's not needed. Well, what's the reason? I get this a lot. I say, the reason is you haven't been pregnant. Like, right? That's the reason. Right.
Yeah.
So there's always a reason for them, because sometimes I come up against, they don't want to suggest it. And then they have,
Hey, I had
yeah,
a doctor tell me
fine.
that if he orders a free T3, the other doctors would make fun of him.
Oh my gosh. See, and the functional medicine expert in my group, I have, she's the one who does all that genius stuff you guys do. I can't do that stuff. Like, she's like a health detective, right? She doesn't just want TSH, free T3. She wants T4, total T3, these protein. I don't know. All these like things where she's like, that's how you know about your thyroid. I'm like, ugh, yeah. And so we sometimes have a hard time getting some of that stuff, but you guys and the really good functional medicine experts can also, like, assume, right? If based on I know I said I just hate assuming, but sometimes we can't get tests done. And then it's, well, based on what we are seeing, we know for sure, we can know that this is probably happening internally. But yeah, the data is huge.
Yep.
And that's just sad that I always say to my clients, don't expect your IVF doctor to know how to get your body out of survival mode, right? You having a thyroid issue, the doctor is going to handle the what. What's the problem? I have a thyroid issue. Take a medication to lower your thyroid. Great. You need that. Functional medicine experts are going to handle the why. Why do I have a thyroid issue? Again, not my expertise, but they go into the whole, your iodine is this and your testosterone is this and that, and then that leads to a thyroid issue. And you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
right. So I don't fault the medical doctors for not knowing this stuff. This is a totally different study. I don't love that they kind of poo-poo it. Like, it doesn't matter. Your cycle doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It's your fifth vital sign, right? It's a sign of something is off.
Well, from their perspective, I think because they're overriding your natural cycle, they're replacing your natural cycle. I think it's an interesting topic, especially for my audience and my practitioners, because if, for example, if I have practitioners whose clients are then thinking of doing IVF at some point, there is a bit of a clash of worlds in a way. So particularly, like I've had clients who are at some point making that decision to move forward with IVF, and they're wanting to kind of chart their cycles. And that's a clash of worlds because when you're doing IVF, there's nothing like, there's no judgment about it. I mean, babies come in different ways. And you know what I mean? I'm always really thankful that we have these options. So when you choose IVF, that's not the same. That's not the same as when you chart your cycles and are doing the birds and bees thing, because they're actually preparing the uterus with the hormones, right? They're administering the hormones in before ovulation to optimize the uterine lining in that way. They're triggering ovulation based on their schedule. They often put women, as you mentioned at the beginning of the call, on birth control to quote, sync up the cycle or whatever to get it on their schedule. So you're submitting to a highly medicalized approach to conception that doesn't exactly match the concept of like classic kind of cycle charting. I don't think it means that you can't note different sensations and feelings. And I feel like it could be very useful to journal so that you can know what's going on and identify the different phases. I feel like there could still be some value in that, but I also feel like someone needs to say, like, it's not going to be the same if you're charting, and you could just not chart like classically.
Yeah. And
through the IVF cycle.
Yes, but I disagree a little bit in terms of like, you do need to know your cycle, period, because again, that is your fifth vital sign.
Yeah.
And if I'm preparing somebody for a transfer, for example, and if we know for sure you build up your lining beautifully naturally and your progesterone is beautiful naturally, I don't recommend that they get on a lot of those medications. So the cookie cutter way to do IVF is downregulate an estrogen. That's actually not the protocol that I ever recommend at first for most, pending the issues. But if you can, again, get as fertile as possible naturally, that is absolutely going to help your IVF, the medications that you do or don't have to take. And also, you can't force a pregnancy. You can't even force an embryo, right? So we need that really good, healthy egg quality. You can try to force fertilization even with ICSI, like putting the sperm in there doesn't mean it's going to fertilize unless it's healthy enough to. You can't force the embryos to grow. So I feel like, your work of getting you as fertile as possible is just, IVF can't override that. And you need to be as healthy and fertile and synced up naturally as possible for the best results. That is going to, and your AMH could increase, your FSH could go down when you are fertile naturally as possible. So I just think it makes IVF and that getting pregnant part, which you absolutely can't force, so much easier.
Well, yeah. And I think we may be saying more similar than different in the sense that, of course, I'm all for charting and I'm all for charting throughout the process. And typically, I think a lot of us think of IVF as like maybe not your ideal situation. It's really for when you need it kind of thing. And so one of the things I often will say to my clients, because you can't, like you said, you can't force a pregnancy, and there could be issues that are underlying that. I think for a lot of couples, it's the time. Everyone has a period of time which they're comfortable trying naturally. And if they happen to pass that time frame, obviously, like it makes sense to start looking at other options, right?
Mm-hmm.
But up until that point, I think that charting is, I'm biased. I think charting is essential. I think it gives you so much insight, and you can really get a sense, like even in what you were talking about before with male factor, I think charting, that's one of the reasons why I talk so much about it, because when you see that a woman's menstrual cycle is healthy and functioning, but the pregnancy isn't happening cycle after cycle. And, a lot of people have some mild hormonal fluctuations and things, but when you see a cycle that's pretty strong consistently, but it's not happening, you have to start to wonder what's going on. So, I mean,
Yeah.
this is a long way to get into it, but I had a question for you because you indicated that, if the cycle is strong and healthy, you might be doing different medications. So is it possible for someone to do IVF without all of that estrogen and progesterone based on their own natural cycle? That's like the first question. Because if they need IVF, the doctors would likely argue that they need to provide these drugs to make the cycle stronger. Like I've heard that kind of argument. So what are your thoughts?
You mean, are you talking specifically about the embryo transfer?
Well, if they're transferring it, like would they be willing to do that without preparing the uterus in that way, or would they just be like modifying the amount of the hormone?
Yeah, no, that would be a natural transfer cycle, right? There's natural transfer cycles, which is nothing. And you just track your own ovulation, and then the doctor it's a lot of work, right? Because there's a lot of tracking. But yeah, there are natural transfer cycles, and then there's modified natural transfer cycles. Well, maybe you take letrozole, which is an estrogen suppressor, which can be nice for certain clients, and then a trigger shot to know for sure when that surge, I put in quotes, is happening, helps with the timing a little bit. But that letrozole in the beginning it's called a modified natural transfer cycle or letrozole transfer cycle. So yeah, you absolutely could skip a lot of the medications based on what you do naturally.
Jumping into today's episode with a thank you, actually. Thanks to the amazing Fertility Friday community, Real Food for Fertility has been an amazing success. We have seen our book travel to the top of the charts, to be number 1 in the fertility category on Amazon, number 1 in the menstruation category on Amazon, and we really couldn't have done that without you. So I want to thank all of you who purchased a copy of the book, who shared the book with your friends, family, clients, who've left a review and rating on Amazon. And I also wanted to let you know that one of the best ways that you can support our writing, whether it be our newest book, Real Food for Fertility, or my first book, The Fifth Vital Sign, if you've read and if you enjoyed the book, one of the most helpful things you can do is actually leave a review on Amazon. I mean, if you think about if for those of you who shop on Amazon, if you're anything like me, one of the first things that I do when I'm looking at whether it's a new book or a product item, whatever it is I go straight to the reviews and see what other people are saying about it. So your review could help somebody who's been trying to conceive and needs this information, or who's been struggling with menstrual cycle issues and sees your review and realizes that this book could be something that could help them. So I just want to thank all of you for your support thus far. If you haven't grabbed your copy yet, of course, you can find our books on Amazon. And if you have purchased your copy already and haven't yet had a moment to leave a review, we appreciate it so much. And honestly, that is one of the best ways you can help us to get the word out. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. Mm-hmm. And so this is really interesting to me, of course. And I haven't looked, a lot of my research is in other areas. So I'm typically not, like I haven't researched IVF for a while. So is there interesting research on those approaches that show more promising results in some cases? Or is that one of the situations where you said, there's not always research for every little thing?
Yeah, no, like the using letrozole in a transfer cycle, there's absolutely research on that. I have 3 articles off the top of my head. So yeah, there is some of that research, and then there's some research that's not there on different protocols. But there is definitely research on how letrozole could help a frozen embryo transfer cycle.
Interesting. Well, the reason that I ask is, again, it's like going back to everything we talked about. If you were trying to advocate for a cycle, an IVF cycle that utilized either less hormones or even a natural cycle, I would imagine that would be an opportunity for pushback given that it's not like, quote, the way things are done, right? The cookie cutter approach. So as we wrap up, I'm curious of some of your experiences then with clients who've chosen some of these kind of non-traditional IVF routes. Like obviously you're doing this for a reason, and you've learned a lot in your own personal journey and now the years that you've been working with clients. So from your perspective, for clients who are, because as you can imagine, I have a lot of clients, even when they're looking at doing an IUI cycle, like they don't, a lot of my clients are trying to first go with as few hormone insults as possible,
Right.
because of their personal values. Maybe they're personally just wanting to do things more naturally, or they're concerned about the side effects or what have you. So from your perspective, then clients who are making these decisions to try to do the less traditional cycles, what have some of the results been, outcomes, your perspective on it? I'm really curious.
Yeah. And it's, it's the clients deciding to do it, but the doctor's agreeing to it. Right. And
yes,
so,
of course.
but
when it works out.
right. But the conversation is what I talk to my clients about on how to talk to the doctor. And it depends on what is happening. But the conversation, just to give people a way that I would present it, is the why. I understand estrogen is used to build up my lining, but my natural lining is at a 8 and it's triangular without knowing. How do we know? Well, we either tracked it ourselves, or even when you're doing stimulation drugs, they track the lining. Now, that's not your natural lining. You've taken stimulation drugs, but you find evidence to say, like, these are the facts. So why are we adding in estrogen to build up the lining? Or,
when the lining is already strong in this case, kind of thing.
Right. So assuming you got the doctor to agree, no, the protocols that I come up with that are customized to each client, absolutely, I feel optimize the outcomes.
Yeah.
I absolutely feel like they should be better known. That's really what my work is about. And I have stuff coming out later in the year. Like, everybody needs to know this. It can't just be me and anybody who hires me one-on-one. I really need to get this out. By the time this airs, I'll have done it. But like this Thursday, I'm doing a live webinar on elevating your own IVF. It's like, here's the way that it was done. Here is the better way to do it. So here's questions to discuss with your doctor. So any of your listeners, just email me and I'll send you the recording of it, because it will be done by then. But yeah, I find when you optimize IVF for the patient, and it's really based on a bunch of factors, factors put together my formula in my head, but then the ultimate in consulting with somebody on perfect protocols is plus the history. And I look at how things grew on the medications that they were on to really perfect what their next protocol and strategies could be. So yeah, I find all of these, again, the usual way. I can't stand it when there's a medicated cycle for a frozen embryo transfer for no reason. Because I have just seen over and over again, like, here's just an example. Women's bodies hate synthetic estrogen. Like, they just, like, so many, not all, but a lot. And we assume that women's bodies love synthetic estrogen. It's just not true. So when you see
why would they? It's like fake, whatever your favorite thing is. Like,
I don't
you have
know.
fruits and you have like a real mango or like a synthetic one. Like, hello.
Right.
Why would you like this? Why would you love the synthetic mango?
Right.
It sounds awful.
It's so true.
I hope they never make one.
Yeah. It would taste so bad. Yeah, I agree. It's, a big part of, and I do have, a doctor that I partner with, but I don't know why I like some of these things. Like, I would love to, like, truly interview some doctors and be like, one, why don't you know this? Or two, like, why would you do that? Why would you assume this? And so I would love to, like, do a
I feel like we kind of know the answer, though, because the medical profession, when you said the cookie cutter approach, like, the medical profession churns out cookie cutter doctors. It's an assembly line. And so I didn't go through med school and specifically did IVF, like, right, training. So, like, but I would imagine that the reason that most women have that specific experience that you're talking about related to the protocols, the drugs, and the things is because that's what they teach in med school. And I would imagine that the doctors that you came across in your journey, where you actually learned that it can be done differently and had those different experiences, are because what I found as a podcaster, you probably found this as well, is that, as much as it's exciting to go to somebody who's recently graduated, right? Like a recent graduate, very keen, whatever. There's a big, big difference between someone who's just recently graduated from their medical program and someone who's actually worked, not just work, like the person who said I had 30 years experience, not just work with people doing the same cookie cutter approach for 30 years, but who actually became curious about why this worked or why this didn't work. Or the doctor who took it upon themselves to do some specific research or attend specific conferences or continue to learn new techniques or study under someone who knows more than them or fill in the blank, right? So it's what I've learned as a podcaster, as a practitioner, I'm sure you've seen this as well, is that there's a huge, huge difference between your average doctor and the doctor who became curious and learned more than what they learned in med school, read more than what they were assigned at the time. Like when the education didn't stop when they graduated, but also take a specific interest in their patients. I think that these are the people for whom the heart is in the right place. When they're looking at the results they're getting with their patients and they're like, this just doesn't seem right. Like I went to med school because I wanted to help people. Like what is happening here? And then they find out more. Like, my gosh, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there is a culture and I might be a little, I don't want to say I'm a little jaded, but I just said it. But I think there's a culture with IVF that good enough is good enough because if you only do good enough, you have to do more IVF. And so for me, that's
it's not free.
It's not free, and it's only
Definitely
20% or 27% of Americans, at least, have it covered by insurance. And people do it. The stat is like 2.3 to 2.7 times at 23,000 a pop. These are all averages.
Yeah.
So, like my first round of IVF, again, 33. No, everything's great with me. 15 eggs, and I had like 2 bad-looking embryos the first time. Right, nothing happened with those, and when the doctor, I said, what happened? Like, what? I don't know. So what are we going to do differently? Oh, we'll do a Lupron flare, right? I say it that way. He didn't say it that way. But, and I was like, that doesn't seem like a big difference. And he's like, I don't know. Pay me again and we'll try again. That's your option.
Yeah.
You can either sit there not knowing or you can just try again. And so you just try again. And then I'm sitting there going, because at that point I went from biology teacher to corporate America when I moved to New York. First rule of business is, it costs so much more to get a new client than to just add money onto your current client.
Yeah.
And I know that
cost of acquisition.
Yes, it sounds so terrible. And I hate even saying it, but that was running through my head. This doctor is about to get paid twice instead of once. What is his, and this is New York City and this is expensive. And what is his incentive? And you may say, oh, stats. Nope, I have an argument for that. Like the stats are, you do 35 to 40% success rates, you're a rock star. So no other profession has that, right? I just feel like there's this huge lack of accountability. It breaks my heart. There's a lack of transparency. They get to tell you all this stuff is happening behind a curtain. Nobody gets to see behind. And there's no insurance covering it. It's such a big business. I just feel like there's not that passion to get it optimized and do the best IVF possible. Whether you're the kindest, most generous doctor, there is a subconscious there where you make twice as much if you have to do it twice and you're still well above the national average for success rates. So that's the part. So many parts of what I do kind of are like heartbreaking to me, but that's a big part of it. And that's where I'm really hoping the education that I put out on my podcast, IVF Uncovered, as well as on the lives that I do, as well as some of the things coming out later in the year, I'm hoping it can really change an industry. And that seems weird to me, like, who am I? But when every IVF patient knows this information, it has to change for the better, for them.
Look, if they start advocating for what they want. And then if the doctors are not willing to play ball, they find a new doctor. So that would make a difference.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm in this camp, like my brain is going of like, when I think about the work that I do and the part of this is why we need a team. Like this is like the podcast episode of like why we need a whole team.
Always.
But there's a lot of I would argue that there's a large percentage of women who get a crash course in all of this fertility related information when they're already 2 steps before IVF because they've already been trying for quite a while. And so I take it even before that to even when we're teenagers, we should be learning about our cycles. Mm-hmm. We should be learning about our fertility, how it changes over time. We should be learning about contraceptives, the impact that they have on our overall well-being, the different side effects, as well as potential fertility. We should learn about that delay in the return of normal fertility so that when we're coming off contraceptives, we can incorporate that into our plan. And we should obviously learn about nutrition and the role of preconception nutrition and fertility, male factor, the key nutrients and foods that really support optimal fertility. Because I believe that like we could be like the dream team because we can reduce the number of couples who need IVF with that approach. And then those who do need it, we could even further optimize, because I'm thinking, when I think about optimizing IVF, I think of getting those nutrients on board, optimizing sperm and egg quality, reducing that sperm DNA damage, optimizing egg quality to the extent that we can based on our age category, et cetera, et cetera. And then you come in and you're like, and what are you doing with that medication? Like we can further optimize this by moving more closely, it sounds like, with a woman's natural cycle and actually looking at the patient and the situation and tailoring the approach to her. So, you're speaking my language, although I'm typically not in the IVF world, right? Like, but this is, and it's so interesting because we live in a culture where we always look to the experts for all the answers. And at the end of the day, like the people who are going to find the answers are the ones that are impacted by it. Like you said, what is the doctor's incentive to actually get it right?
Right.
That was powerful. That's awful.
Yeah. And then after 3 times, they make you go to egg donor, which is a whole nother revenue source.
Yeah. Wow.
No, you are so speaking my language. And if I had it my way, every client would have done your program.
Yes.
Right.
That further optimizes it.
And
maybe some of them get pregnant on the way, but the ones who don't, right? Yep. Then like this is, and it's Vagina Power, where I was going to say girl power, but like, why would I could say?
Right.
Power to the vaginas. Because who's going to get it done? If you wait until they start teaching this in med school, we'll both be dead.
I know. So true. Yeah. And it is so rare. People usually come to me. People are like, when should we start working together? I'm like, oh my gosh, yesterday. But,
right? Like 2 years ago.
Right. But they usually come to me pretty deep into it, right? Nobody tends to hire an IVF. I do get it sometimes when it's like, I'm like giddy when they have never done IVF and I just get to kind of maneuver it from the start. But so many of my clients have suddenly gotten pregnant naturally while preparing for IVF because I so believe in that work of you got to get your body from survival mode to reproductive mode. It just is the formula. This is what I've studied and researched, and it's common sense, and it absolutely impacts things. So if they can work with you for 6 to 12 months before, and then come,
right? It's like worlds colliding in the best way.
It would make IVF. Yeah, it would mean less IVF, I think, for most.
Well, because I went on a rant about in a way, like I feel like it was like a scientific, carefully worded and like well-edited rant, but still in the sperm chapter, because essentially, obviously male factor doesn't represent the whole picture, but ICSI, what you spoke about, which is the intercytoplasmic sperm, like when they put the sperm directly into the egg, that is their solution for male factor.
Right.
That's literally, so the woman, like in your case, and you know this intimately, because you were going through, like your feet are in the stirrups, you've got needles going in your abdomen, like you're doing all this stuff because we're not, trying to down husband or anything, but like legit, like that's the solution. This is what the medical industry has come up with for male factor. And you just got to think to yourself, like, hello, like nothing else Just,
Right.
you got nothing else?
That's the what,
solution?
right? And not the why. Why is there DNA fragmentation?
Yeah.
Well, sponges are, or sperm are sponges for toxins, like worse than eggs. Yeah. So I agree. And again, that's where both of them come in. If you're doing whatever you're doing, but especially IVF, I will tell you, most people hire me for the science, right? Tell me the protocols, tell me the strategies.
Yes, yeah.
They
just want to know what to do because they're just like, I've been doing it. I spent all
I
this
don't
money.
care.
It didn't work.
Right. And they already say, I'm doing acupuncture and I'm basically eating nothing that I love. I'm like, that doesn't sound great, but
yeah. And then I'd be like, what's he doing?
Yeah. But we have to focus on the why. Why? When my husband, Brian, he had low sperm count, right? That's why we had to do IVF. It was too low even for IUI. And the doctor never questioned why.
Yeah.
Like, he looked for a varicocele. Nope. Okay.
Pull up the nuts. Oh, no, we're good.
Yeah. And it
doesn't make sense.
We're not getting you don't what why?
Yeah.
Who knows? It's unknown, just like unknown, right? So I always say there is no such thing as unexplained infertility. That just doesn't make sense unless you were born with reproductive organs that were compromised in some way. You'd know about it.
Yes, exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, okay. So we should wrap up soon because I could talk to you all afternoon. I'm having a great time. So I'm going to try not to get carried away. But as we wrap up, I feel like we covered a lot of ground today. Like, I'm really excited to share this episode. I think it's full of a lot of interesting information, especially for women who are specifically searching for an episode on IVF. I think that this is really, really enlightening. I feel enlightened as well. For the listener then who tuned in for that reason, maybe just share your top 2 or 3 takeaways, just what you would want them to leave with.
If they're doing IVF?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it has to be equal: science, survival mode shift, and spirit. We didn't really get into spirit, but that's where, if we're going, and listen, I've worked with people that were fully depressed, and I was actually a little concerned, but just a little shift you just need a little shift. It doesn't need to be you're enlightened, going through IVF. But when you are in a cycle of fear and sadness, a lot of body shaming, a lot of judgment, mostly on yourself, that just makes it harder. Right. And so give it equal parts of, and I don't believe in think positively and positive things happen. Like, I think you have clarity, you're going to have confidence. If I give you clarity of what can optimize your IVF or what you could do to optimize your fertility, that brings natural confidence. We always know there will things we can't control, but with we are doing that before you invest your time, money, egg reserve, energy. So I would say 1 is give it equal parts: science, survival mode shift, and spirit. And number 2 is if it doesn't feel right, it's not. And this is absolutely for your clients as well. Any physical or mental ailment, like your period, okay? If it is not easy, there is something off. Going to IVF, people hire me because they're like, I feel like I'm not getting the best protocol. I feel like there's a strategy. If it doesn't feel right, it's not. Even picking a doctor, I don't care what her name is and what clinic they're at. Trust me, actually, my favorite doctors are probably at a clinic you've never heard. That being said, first thing I tell my clients when they have met a doctor, I don't ask what they talked about. I go, how'd you feel?
Good question.
And right away, I don't even need to continue the conversation if they talk about they felt, or it was hard to communicate. Like, somebody said to me, like, I had a hard time like understanding him. Zip, done. It doesn't make either one of you bad. It just didn't feel right. Trust your instinct. Listen, be quiet, listen, and feel. And so, yeah, those would be the 2 things: science, survival, and spirit. Give those equal effort. And if it doesn't feel right, it's not.
Sorry to jump in. When you were saying that, I just had the thought, which is, it's not like I said already, it's not free. It gets such a big investment. It's like a car. Like, it's like a car, like a good one too, like not even a nice one. So yeah, if your doctor isn't giving you the good, like the vibes, like I feel like, especially with IVF, leave and find another one because that's a lot of money to be spending to feel like crap when you're speaking to somebody for something that is so just integral, starting your family, right? Like building your family. So huge, huge takeaways. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, but I will tell you, and this is for everybody listening, your brain wants you to be comfortable, and some people will forego what is right for comfort. Because I've had that many times. Oh, it's such a pain to change doctors. No, so I'll
right. Yeah.
call. They'll take you in a second, right? I mean, I can't do that with every doctor, but I have a lot of
somehow with doctors, I feel there's this special category in our brains for doctors.
Yes.
Because they're allowed to do all the stuff. You would never go back to a hairdresser that chopped off your stuff, chopped off your hair, or who like you asked for a color and you end up with like a bad bleach job and half your hair falls out. You would literally never go back. Like you wouldn't. I really don't. There, or let's say there'd be a very small chance. Like maybe you would give them a second chance and then immediately regret it. But you would or like a sleazy car salesman or someone. But for a doctor, they could fully be rude, ignorant, like put you down, make you cry, and you'll still go back.
Yeah.
Which is wild. Yeah. So stop that.
And stop that because again, those really famous, those really
on the TV,
clinics, it's
on
really
the morning breakfast shows. Yeah, you can walk out of their offices too, honey. We give you permission.
Yeah.
And never come back.
Yeah, it's hard when they're famous, but the most famous, I'm not impressed by because they tend to go too corporate, and then it's not patient driven, it's profit driven, and I have so much proof of it. And so if it doesn't feel right, it's not. And don't be afraid of doctors. And it's not a pain in the ass to change doctors or to maybe have to travel a little bit because there's strategies so you don't have to travel that much. But what's a pain in the ass is doing IVF over and over and over and never getting anywhere. And then all of a sudden it's now you need to pay 50 grand for an egg donor. That's what should be considered the pain. But it's hard. It's hard. I get it. I have to go through those conversations a lot and be very objective and just give the facts of, but ultimately I have patients often or clients often like, I'm not changing doctors. I'm like, okay, now let's come up with questions for the doctor because we cannot do this again this way.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
All right, Tasha. Everyone just has to go listen to your podcast.
Oh, thanks. Yours too.
Topic. Yes. Well, thank you.
So by the way, I talk about you all the time to my clients. I always, because part of it is knowing their cycle, right? That's part of creating a perfect protocol. And I'm like, listen to Lisa. It is a fifth vital sign for a reason. And yeah, I say it all the time. Yep.
Oh, that's amazing. And helpful, right? Because I have to think about this. When a woman, starts working with you, that might be the only time in her life she pays for fertility coaching. Mm-hmm. So it's like a big responsibility to provide her with as much useful information and support as possible. So,
right. Because whatever is happening here will translate in their pregnancy, will translate after. I'm sure you see that. It's if we can teach the women now how to understand the signals of their body, it
carries over
whole life so much easier, right? I'm late 40s. I'm 48. I didn't learn this stuff until I was 40, and it's life changing. Yeah. And it's like I didn't know my period is so easy, right? I also know now I'm premenopausal. I'm saying before that, but but it's like when you don't have those anxiety, those harassing thoughts. I still have stress. I still have anxiety. but I know how to turn it off so quickly when I know how to balance hormones and changes your life for the better.
Yeah. And we were learning about our ears and our eyes, which are also important, but I would argue that this is more pertinent.
Yeah.
All right, Tasha. So where can everybody go to find you? Tell us about your podcast, website, programs, all the places.
So IVF Uncovered is my podcast. I think the best thing to do is go to my website, tashablasi.com, and there is a quiz that you can take where you just have to answer a couple questions, and I give you customized resources. So are you doing an egg retrieval or a transfer? Egg retrieval, low egg reserve, high egg reserve, stuff like that, right? That gives you just so many free resources. So that's where I say everybody should start. But yes, IVF Uncovered is my podcast. But first step, go to the website and take that quiz, and you will get customized free resources immediately.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a great conversation.
Yes, and congratulations on your amazing book. I love it. I used to give my clients Real Food for Pregnancy book all the time. So now I will be gifting Real Food for Fertility. I'm so happy that Lily and you collaborated on that. That's just awesome.
Well, thank you so much. That is
such good stuff. Everybody buy the book. It's such good stuff.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/518. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Tasha. I found today's episode to be really interesting. And one of the reasons I found it so interesting was because I just hadn't really thought about it, to be honest. I didn't anticipate how many parallels there were with IVF and virtually any other issue that a woman has and related to her hormone health, her fertility, her menstrual cycle, reproductive health, and goes to a doctor and is, not supported. So it was really interesting to hear how IVF drugs are used indiscriminately for everybody, regardless of their circumstance, and how there's this cookie cutter approach where women are just kind of fed through this assembly line, regardless of their individual circumstances. And surprise, surprise, it's not as effective at supporting a woman through this process. And even when you're looking at a process that is highly medicalized, induced by medications, there's still nuance and individuality that could improve the outcomes that is not being utilized by these professionals, which is just really eye-opening. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend whenever you are tuning into the show. And I want you to stay tuned for an announcement in the coming weeks. We will be opening up registration for the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship in the next few weeks. So just giving you a heads up on that. We are looking to start our next round in the beginning of the summer. So we are looking to start our next round in July. So if you've had your eye on this program, stay tuned. Consider joining the waiting list. You can find those details over at fertilityfriday.com/famlive, fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. And you can also grab our ebook, How to Interpret Virtually Any Chart Your Client Throws at You. And once you are on my email list, you will be the first to know when we open up registration again. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the podcast, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you not only to teach fertility awareness to your clients, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to join the waiting list and be the first to know when registration opens up again. There's no program like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.